The first gunshot barely missed Lillian Keller's head as she ducked behind a water barrel outside the general store in Silver Creek, Wyoming. The year was 1879, and she had just become the most hunted woman in the territory, all because she'd witnessed something she was never meant to see. "Get down," a deep voice commanded as strong hands pulled her to the ground. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs as she found herself pressed against the dusty boardwalk, the stranger's body shielding hers from the barrage of bullets splintering the wood around them. The scent of gunpowder and leather filled her nostrils as she caught sight of her protector, a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Can you run?" he asked, his voice low and urgent as he checked the chambers of his revolver. "Yes," Lillian managed to whisper, her throat dry with fear. "When I start shooting, you head for that alley," he instructed, nodding toward a narrow passage between the apothecary and the hardware store. "Don't look back," Lillian nodded, gathering her skirts in trembling hands. The man, whoever he was, gave her a quick nod before standing and firing 3 rapid shots toward the saloon across the street. Lillian didn't waste the opportunity. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her boots kicking up dust as she fled. The sound of gunfire continued behind her, but she followed instructions and didn't look back. The alley provided momentary shelter, but Lillian knew it wouldn't last. Conrad Blackwater's men wouldn't stop hunting her, not after what she'd seen at the mining office last night. The memory of the town's most respected businessman putting a bullet between the eyes of the federal marshal made her stomach turn. "This way." The stranger appeared suddenly beside her, taking her elbow. "My horse is behind the livery." "Who are you?" Lillian demanded, even as she allowed him to guide her through the back alleys of Silver Creek. "Isaac Forrester," he replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "And you're in a heap of trouble, Miss Keller. You know my name." "Everyone knows your name now," Isaac said grimly. "Blackwater's put a price on your head that's got every desperado for 100 miles looking to collect." They reached the livery stable, and Isaac whistled softly. A magnificent Palomino stallion trotted from the shadows, already saddled and ready. "How did you—" "No time for questions," Isaac cut her off, boosting her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "We need to put distance between us and town before Blackwater's men regroup." The horse leapt forward at Isaac's command, powerful muscles bunching beneath them as they thundered away from Silver Creek. Lillian clung to the saddle horn, acutely aware of the solid warmth of the stranger at her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. For the first hour, they rode hard, following the winding creek before veering off into thicker forest where the horse picked its way carefully through dense undergrowth. Only when they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley did Isaac finally slow their pace. "We should be safe here for a moment," he said, dismounting and helping Lillian down. Her legs felt like jelly after the grueling ride, and she stumbled against him. His hand steadied her, strong yet gentle. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Forrester?" Lillian asked, stepping back to regard him properly for the first time. He was taller than she'd initially thought, broad-shouldered with a lean, hard-muscled frame. His dark hair was streaked with sun, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. There was something in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years, though she guessed him to be no more than 30. "You saw Blackwater murder Marshal Davis," he stated rather than asked. Lillian nodded, shivering despite the warm spring air. "I was delivering some mending to the office next door. I heard voices and I shouldn't have looked through that window, but something in the marshal's tone alarmed me. Blackwater's been running this territory like his personal kingdom for too long," Isaac said, his jaw tightening. The marshal was about to expose his operation: smuggling, extortion, claim jumping. Davis had gathered enough evidence to bring him down. "How do you know all this?" Lillian asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Isaac's expression darkened. "Because I've been tracking Blackwater for almost 2 years. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency." Lillian felt her knees weaken. "Then you can help me testify against him. We can go to the territorial authorities." "It's not that simple," Isaac interrupted. "Blackwater has judges and officials in his pocket from here to Cheyenne. And after what happened to Davis, it's clear he's not afraid to eliminate problems permanently." "So what am I supposed to do?" Lillian asked, her voice rising in panic. "I can't go back to Silver Creek. I have no family, no place to—" "You could come with me to my ranch," Isaac said, interrupting her spiral of fear. "It's about 2 days' ride from here, near the Montana border, remote enough that Blackwater's men won't find you easily. And why would you offer your home to a complete stranger?" Lillian asked, eyeing him warily. 23 years of life had taught her to be cautious of men bearing seemingly altruistic gifts. "Because you're the only witness to Blackwater's crime," Isaac explained, "which makes you my best hope of finally bringing him to justice. And because no one deserves to die for doing the right thing." Lillian considered his words. She had few options and none of them good. Going back was certain death. Trying to make it to another town alone was nearly as dangerous, with bounty hunters searching for her. This man, this detective-turned-cowboy, was offering her safety. "I accept your offer, Mr. Forrester," she said finally. "But I want to be clear, I won't be beholden to any man, no matter the circumstances." A hint of a smile touched Isaac's lips. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Keller. We should keep moving. We'll need to find shelter before nightfall." They rode until dusk, finally stopping at a small trapper's cabin that Isaac knew was abandoned. While he tended to the horse, Lillian gathered kindling for a fire, grateful for practical skills learned during her years of independence. Inside the cabin, she found it spare but clean enough, with a small hearth and a single bed frame with a straw mattress. Isaac returned with saddlebags containing jerky, biscuits, and coffee. They ate in relative silence, both exhausted from the day's events. "You should take the bed," Isaac said as he laid his bedroll on the floor. "I'll keep watch for the first part of the night." "I don't imagine I'll sleep much anyway," Lillian admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. Everything she owned was back in Silver Creek, her small seamstress shop, the little house she'd worked so hard to secure after her parents' passing 3 years ago. Now she was a fugitive, dependent on the protection of a man she barely knew. "How did you become a Pinkerton?" she asked, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from darker thoughts. Isaac settled against the wall, his rifle across his knees. "Served in the war, then drifted for a while. Ended up stopping a bank robbery by chance in Denver. One of the agents was impressed, offered me a job. And the ranch? Inherited it from my uncle 2 years ago," he explained. "It gave me a good cover for my work in this territory. Blackwater doesn't suspect a simple rancher." Lillian nodded, studying him in the flickering firelight. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet competence that made her feel safer than she had any right to feel given the circumstances. "You should try to rest," Isaac said, his voice gentler than before. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Lillian nodded and stretched out on the straw mattress, not bothering to remove more than her boots. Despite her earlier prediction, exhaustion soon pulled her into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of gunshots and pursuit. She woke to the smell of coffee and found Isaac crouched by the fire, his profile outlined by the pale light of dawn filtering through the cabin's single window. For a moment, She simply watched him, the economy of his movements, the capable hands that poured steaming liquid into a tin cup. "You're awake," he said without turning. "How did you know?" Lillian asked, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled skirts. "Your breathing changed." He handed her the coffee. "We should reach Willow Creek by nightfall. There's a woman there, Martha Quinn, who can help you with some supplies. Can't have you arriving at the ranch looking like a fugitive." Lillian felt a flash of indignation. "I'm sorry my appearance doesn't meet with your approval, Mr. Forrester, but I didn't exactly have time to pack for this journey." The corner of Isaac's mouth quirked upward. "I meant no offense, Miss Keller. It's a matter of practicality. The fewer people who connect you with the woman Blackwater's hunting, the safer you'll be." Lillian sipped her coffee, acknowledging the logic of his statement with a nod. "You seem to have thought this through carefully." "Planning ahead keeps people alive in my line of work," Isaac replied, packing up their meager belongings. "We should move out soon. Blackwater's men will be searching every settlement within 50 miles. They rode hard that day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and stretch their legs." Isaac proved to be a man of few words but quick actions. When they forded a swollen creek, he dismounted to lead the horse through the treacherous currents, getting soaked to the waist in the process, without a word of complaint. When a rattlesnake startled the palomino, he calmed the animal with soft words and a steady hand. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a spring storm. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. "We need to push harder," Isaac called over his shoulder. "That storm's moving fast." They crested a hill just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Below them lay a small settlement, no more than 24 buildings clustered around what appeared to be a main street. "Willow Creek," Isaac explained as they descended toward the town. "Not much to look at, but the people here don't ask questions." By the time they reached the edge of town, the rain was falling in earnest. Isaac guided them to a modest house set apart from the others, with a small garden and smoke curling from the chimney. Before they could dismount, the door opened, revealing a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. "Isaac Forrester, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" she called out, though there was no real censure in her tone. "The kind that needs your discretion, Martha," Isaac replied, helping Lillian down from the horse. "This is Miss Lillian Keller. She needs a place to stay dry and some fresh clothes if you can spare them." Martha's sharp eyes assessed Lillian from head to toe. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, for she nodded briskly. "Get inside before you both catch your death. Isaac, stable that beast around back. I'll see to the young lady." Inside, the house was warm and smelled of baking bread. Martha efficiently guided Lillian to a small bedroom, providing a simple but clean dress, undergarments, and a towel to dry her hair. "You can change in here," Martha said. "Leave your wet things by the door and I'll see to them." When Lillian emerged some time later, feeling human again in the borrowed dress, she found Isaac and Martha deep in conversation at the kitchen table. They fell silent as she entered. "Come sit, child," Martha said, pushing a steaming bowl of stew toward an empty chair. "You look half-starved." "Thank you for your kindness," Lillian said, realizing how hungry she was as the rich aroma hit her nostrils. "I'm sorry to impose on you like this." "Any friend of Isaac's is welcome here," Martha replied, though her shrewd gaze suggested she knew there was more to the story. As they ate, Isaac explained their situation in vague terms enough for Martha to understand the danger without implicating her with specific knowledge. "So you're taking her to the ranch," Martha said when he finished. "And then what?" "Then I keep her safe until I can build a case against Blackwater that doesn't rely solely on her testimony," Isaac replied. Martha's eyebrows rose. "That could take months, Isaac. I'm aware." Martha turned to Lillian. And you agreed to this plan, Miss Keller? Lillian set down her spoon. I don't have many alternatives, Mrs. Quinn. I can't go back to Silver Creek, and I have no family elsewhere. Hum. Martha studied her face for a long moment. Well, you'll need more than one dress if you're staying at that ranch for any length of time. I have some things that might fit you with a bit of alteration. After dinner, Martha brought out a trunk filled with clothing. These belonged to my daughter before she moved to California with her husband, she explained. She was about your size. Lillian ran her fingers over the fabric's sturdy cottons, a few wools, even a length of pretty blue calico. This is too generous, she protested. Nonsense, Martha replied. They're just gathering dust here. Besides, a woman needs her dignity, especially when circumstances take away everything else. While Lillian sorted through the clothing, she could hear Isaac and Martha talking in low tones in the kitchen. Their voices rose occasionally, with Martha seeming to be lecturing Isaac about something. Lillian couldn't make out the words, but when they returned, Martha looked satisfied and Isaac somewhat chastened. The storm raged through the night, making further travel impossible. Martha insisted they stay until morning, preparing a small room for Isaac while Lillian took the daughter's old bedroom. Lying in the unfamiliar bed, Lillian stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. Her life had changed irrevocably in the span of 24 hours. The future stretched before her, uncertain and frightening. Yet somehow the thought of reaching Isaac's ranch provided a strange comfort. There was something about him, a solid dependability, a sense of contained strength that made her feel less adrift in the chaos her life had become. The storm cleared by dawn, leaving the world washed clean and glistening in the early light. Martha provided them with provisions, fresh bread, dried meat, and the clothes for Lillian packed neatly in saddlebags. "You take care of her, Isaac Forrester," Martha said sternly as they prepared to depart. "She's not just a witness. She's a young woman with her whole life ahead of her." "I know my responsibilities, Martha," Isaac replied, his tone respectful but firm. Martha turned to Lillian, pressing something into her hand. "A little pin money," she whispered. "Every woman should have something that's hers alone." Lillian blinked back tears, touched by this unexpected kindness from a virtual stranger. "Thank you for everything." They rode out as the town was just beginning to stir. Isaac set a steady pace, but not the punishing speed of the previous days. The terrain gradually changed, becoming more rugged and elevated as they moved northward. How much farther? Lillian asked as they stopped to water the horse around midday. "We should reach the ranch by sunset," Isaac replied, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "The last stretch is steep, but the views make it worth the climb." He wasn't exaggerating. As the sun began its descent, they followed a winding trail up into the foothills. Pine forests gave way to spectacular vistas of rolling grasslands backed by distant, snow-capped peaks. The air grew cooler and sharper, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Isaac reined the horse to a halt. Below them lay a verdant valley cradling a sturdy log ranch house, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses and cattle. A stream wound through the property, its waters gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Welcome to Elkhorn Ranch," Isaac said, a note of pride in his voice. Lillian caught her breath at the beauty of the place. After days of fear and uncertainty, the peaceful valley seemed almost unreal. As they approached the ranch house, a wiry man with graying hair emerged from one of the outbuildings, followed by a lanky youth. "Boss," the older man called, hurrying toward them. "Wasn't expecting you back so soon." "Change of plans, Roy," Isaac replied, dismounting and helping Lillian down. "This is Miss Lillian Keller. She'll be staying with us for a while." Roy's weathered face registered surprise, but he recovered quickly, tipping his hat. "Madam, welcome to Elkhorn." "Thank you," Lillian replied, suddenly self-conscious under the curious gazes of the ranch hands. "Roy Jenkins is my foreman," Isaac explained, "and that's Daniel, our newest hand." He nodded toward the young man hovering nearby. "Miss," Daniel mumbled, his freckled face flushing as he ducked his head. "Roy, have Daniel take care of Sundance," Isaac directed. "I'll show Miss Keller to the house." The ranch house proved to be larger than it had appeared from a distance, a substantial structure of squared logs with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large central room containing a massive stone fireplace. "It's not what you're used to, I'm sure," Isaac said as he showed her through the house, "but it's solid and warm." "It's lovely," Lillian replied honestly. After the past few days, the simple comfort of the place was deeply appealing. Isaac showed her to a bedroom at the back of the house. "This was my aunt's room," he explained, pushing open the door. "I haven't changed much since she passed." The room was feminine without being fussy, clean-lined furniture, a colorful quilt on the bed, and curtains framing windows that looked out on a small kitchen garden. "There's a washroom just down the hall," Isaac continued. "Hot water's a luxury, but we manage." Roy's wife, Emma, comes up from their cabin a few times a week to help with cooking and cleaning, but otherwise, it's just us men. Lillian nodded, feeling the enormity of her situation settling on her shoulders once more. She was miles from anywhere, in the home of a man she barely knew, with no clear idea of when or if she could return to her former life. Isaac seemed to sense her thoughts. "I know this isn't ideal, Miss Keller," he said quietly, "but you're safe here. No one connected to Blackwater knows about this place." "And what exactly am I to do here, Mr. Forrester?" Lillian asked. "I can't simply sit idle while you work to bring Blackwater to justice." "That's for you to decide," Isaac replied. "There's plenty of work on a ranch if you're willing, but I won't force any obligations on you. Your primary job is to stay alive so you can testify when the time comes." Before Lillian could respond, a knock at the front door echoed through the house. Isaac's hand immediately went to his sidearm. "Stay here," he instructed, moving swiftly toward the front of the house. Lillian's heart pounded as she heard the door open and men's voices. Had Blackwater's men found them already? She looked around frantically for something she could use as a weapon, settling on a heavy oil lamp. "Miss Keller." Isaac's voice called. "You can come out. It's just Sheriff Donovan from the county seat." Lillian set down the lamp and smoothed her borrowed dress before making her way to the main room. There she found Isaac standing with a tall man wearing a sheriff's badge who regarded her with open curiosity. "Miss Keller, this is Sheriff James Donovan," Isaac introduced them. "Sheriff, Miss Lillian Keller." "Madam," the sheriff tipped his hat, his shrewd eyes assessing her. "Forrester's been telling me about your situation with Blackwater." "You know about Conrad Blackwater?" Lillian asked, surprised. "Been trying to build a case against him for years," Donovan replied with a grimace. "That snake's been bribing officials and intimidating witnesses across 3 counties, never been able to make anything stick. Until now," Isaac interjected. "Miss Keller witnessed him murdering Marshal Davis." Sheriff Donovan's bushy eyebrows rose. "That would explain why my deputy reports Blackwater's offering $500 for information on a young woman matching your description, Miss Keller." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. $500. "That kind of money will bring out every desperado and bounty hunter in the territory," the sheriff continued grimly. "You were right to bring her here, Forrester. It's about as far from Blackwater's usual hunting grounds as you can get." "What happens now?" Lillian asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Now we build a case that can't be dismissed or buried, Donovan replied. I've got a circuit judge coming through in about 2 months who's known for being incorruptible. If we can present him with enough evidence, along with your testimony. 2 months, Lillian echoed faintly. At least, the sheriff confirmed. These things take time, especially when we're dealing with someone as connected as Blackwater. After the sheriff departed with promises to keep them informed of any developments, Lillian sat heavily in one of the chairs by the fireplace. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in completely. She was effectively trapped at this remote ranch for the foreseeable future. I know it's not what you wanted to hear, Isaac said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and offering one to her. Lillian normally didn't indulge in spirits, but she accepted the glass and took a small sip, welcoming the burn as it slid down her throat. 2 months, she repeated. What am I supposed to do for 2 months? Live, Isaac replied simply. Work, wait, and trust that justice will eventually prevail. That night, Lillian lay awake in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the creak and settle of the log house around her. Her mind raced with questions and fears. What would become of her shop in Silver Creek? Would anyone care for the small garden behind her house? Could she truly remain hidden here for months? And what of Isaac Forrester? The man remained something of an enigma, reserved yet courteous, capable of violence yet gentle in his manner toward her. She knew almost nothing about him beyond his occupation, and his evident determination to bring down Conrad Blackwater. Yet her life now depended on his protection and discretion. Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were troubled, filled with pursuing shadows and the echo of gunshots. The following days established a new pattern for Lillian's life. She rose early, as was her habit, and found that the ranch was already bustling with activity by dawn. Isaac and his small crew of hands, Roy, Daniel, and a taciturn man named Thomas, were typically out working with the cattle or horses by the time she emerged from her room. At first, Lillian felt awkward and out of place, unsure of her role in this masculine domain. Emma Jenkins, Roy's wife, provided some welcome female companionship when she came to the main house, but her visits were infrequent. On her 3rd day at the ranch, Lillian approached Isaac as he returned from the corrals for the midday meal. Mr. Forrester, she began, I'd like to contribute something while I'm here. I'm not accustomed to idleness, and I have skills that could be useful. Isaac regarded her with those penetrating gray eyes. What did you have in mind, Miss Keller? I was a seamstress in Silver Creek, she explained. I noticed several items around the house that need mending, and I'm sure the men have clothing that could use attention. I can also cook, though perhaps not to the standards you're accustomed to. A smile, the first real one she'd seen from him, briefly transformed Isaac's face. Miss Keller, the standard we're accustomed to is whatever can be thrown together after a long day's work. Any assistance you'd like to offer would be more than welcome. Thus began Lillian's integration into life at Elkhorn Ranch. She took over much of the cooking, discovering a certain satisfaction in the appreciative reactions of hungry men to her meals. She established a mending day, when the hands could bring their torn shirts and worn socks for her attention. She even began tending the small kitchen garden that had been somewhat neglected in the absence of a woman's touch. As the days passed, Lillian found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. The constant physical activity and fresh air brought color to her cheeks and restful sleep to her nights. She discovered she enjoyed the open spaces and distant horizons of this high country, so different from the close-set buildings of Silver Creek. She also began to know the men better. Roy Jenkins proved to be a fount of practical knowledge and dry humor, while his wife Emma became a friend and confidante during her visits. Young Daniel, barely 20, regarded Lillian with a combination of shy admiration and tongue-tied awkwardness that she found endearing. Thomas rarely spoke, but his quiet competence reminded her somewhat of Isaac himself. And Isaac. Lillian found her understanding of him evolving daily. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain reserve. He rose before dawn and often worked until after dark, his dedication to the ranch evident in everything he did. Yet she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, thoughtful, perhaps, or puzzled. Their interactions gradually became less formal. Mr. Forrester and Miss Keller eventually gave way to Isaac and Lillian during their evening conversations by the fire. He began sharing more about his childhood in Ohio, his experiences during the war, his years with the Pinkerton Agency. In turn, she told him about growing up as the daughter of a shopkeeper, learning her seamstress skills from her mother, and struggling to maintain independence after her parents' deaths from influenza. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, Isaac returned from a trip to town with newspapers, supplies, and a letter for Lillian. "It's from Martha Quinn," he explained as he handed her the envelope. "She sent it through Sheriff Donovan to keep it from being traced." Lillian opened the letter eagerly, hungry for news from the outside world. Martha wrote of small-town happenings, assured Lillian that prayers were being said for her safety, and included a significant piece of information. Conrad Blackwater had increased the bounty for Lillian's capture to $1,000. $1,000, Lillian whispered, looking up at Isaac with wide eyes. "He must be desperate to silence me." "It means he's frightened," Isaac replied, stoking the fire. "Sheriff Donovan's investigation is making him nervous. He's discovered some financial irregularities that connect Blackwater to several suspicious deaths beyond Marshall Davis." "Does that mean I might be able to return home sooner?" Lillian asked hopefully. Isaac's expression turned grim. "It means the opposite, I'm afraid. The higher the bounty, the more dangerous it becomes for you to be seen anywhere near civilization. Donovan thinks it's best if you remain here until the circuit judge arrives." Disappointment washed over Lillian. Though she had adapted to life at Elkhorn better than she'd expected, the thought of remaining in hiding indefinitely was disheartening. "I understand," she said quietly, folding Martha's letter. "I should be grateful for the safety you've provided." "It's not just safety, Lillian," Isaac said, his voice softer than usual. "Your presence here it's made a difference to the place, to all of us." Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of changing feelings, perhaps, or a recognition of possibilities neither had considered before. The moment was broken by a clap of thunder that rattled the windows. Spring was giving way to summer, and with it came the violent afternoon storms common to the region. This one had blown up suddenly, catching everyone by surprise. "That's going to be a bad one," Isaac remarked, moving to secure the shutters. "I'd better check on the stock." "Surely the men have seen to it already," Lillian protested. "It's pouring out there." Roy and Thomas rode to the south pasture this morning to check on a break in the fence line. "They won't be back until tomorrow," Isaac explained, already shrugging into his oilskin coat. "Daniel's just a boy. He'll need help with the horses if this storm gets worse." Before Lillian could argue further, he was gone, the door banging shut behind him. She moved to the window, watching through the rain-streaked glass as his figure disappeared into the downpour. The storm intensified over the next hour, with lightning splitting the sky and wind howling around the eaves of the house. Lillian paced anxiously, wondering what was taking Isaac so long. When the door finally burst open, she rushed forward to find Isaac supporting a pale and shivering Daniel, whose left arm hung at an unnatural angle. "What happened?" Lillian gasped, helping Isaac guide the young man to a chair. "Lightning spooked the horses," Isaac explained tersely. "Daniel got caught between a panicked mare and the corral fence. His arm's broken, and I think he may have cracked some ribs." Lillian immediately began gathering supplies: clean linens, whiskey, her sewing basket. "We need to set that arm," she said, her practical nature taking over. "My father broke his arm once falling from a ladder. I helped the doctor treat it." Between them, they managed to set and splint Daniel's arm, a process that left the young man unconscious from pain, despite the whiskey they'd given him. Isaac carried him to the bunkhouse afterward, returning soaked to the skin and exhausted. "You should change into dry clothes before you catch your death," Lillian admonished, stoking the fire to build up the heat. Isaac nodded wearily and disappeared to his room. When he returned in dry clothing, Lillian had hot coffee waiting and was heating stew from the previous night's dinner. "That was well handled," Isaac said as he accepted the coffee. "Where did you learn such practical medicine?" "Necessity," Lillian replied, stirring the stew. "When you grow up in a small town without a regular doctor, you learn to manage. My mother was often called upon to help with birthing and simple ailments." "You're a surprising woman, Lillian Keller," Isaac remarked, studying her over the rim of his cup. Lillian felt a flush rise to her cheeks at his direct gaze. "I could say the same about you, Mr. Forrester, or should I say, Detective Forrester." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Just Isaac, please. I haven't felt much like a detective lately. More like a rancher with a particularly complicated problem." "Am I the problem?" Lillian asked, only half joking. "No," Isaac replied seriously. "You're the solution I didn't know I was looking for." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Lillian busied herself with serving the stew, while Isaac stared into the fire, seemingly lost in thought. The storm continued through the night, keeping them confined to the house the following day as well. With Daniel injured and Roy and Thomas delayed by flooded creek crossings, Lillian and Isaac found themselves working side by side to tend to necessary chores around the ranch. There was something intimate about these shared tasks: feeding animals, repairing storm damage, preparing meals that fostered a growing companionship between them. By the time Roy and Thomas finally returned, splattered with mud and weary from their journey, Lillian and Isaac had settled into an easy rhythm together. They moved around each other in the kitchen preparing dinner, anticipating each other's needs without words, exchanging small smiles when their eyes happened to meet. That night, after the others had retired to the bunkhouse, they sat before the fire as had become their custom. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a washed clean world and a sky brilliant with stars. "Sheriff Donovan should be coming by next week," Isaac said, breaking a comfortable silence. "He might have news about the case against Blackwater." Lillian nodded, her hands busy with mending one of Isaac's shirts. "Do you think there's really a chance of bringing him to justice?" "A better chance than ever before," Isaac replied. "Donovan's found documentation linking Blackwater to land swindles dating back 5 years. Combined with your testimony about the marshal's murder. If it's enough to convict him, what happens afterward?" Lillian asked, the question that had been growing in her mind for weeks finally finding voice. "Will you go back to your Pinkerton work?" Isaac was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I've been considering my future lately. The Pinkerton work, it suited a different man than I am now, a man without roots or connections, without responsibilities. And now, Lillian prompted when he paused. Isaac's gaze met hers across the space between them. Now I find myself wanting different things. A life that's about building something lasting, not just chasing down lawbreakers. The ranch, Lillian nodded in understanding. The ranch, Isaac agreed. And perhaps, more than that. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Lillian felt her heart quicken as Isaac set aside his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Lillian," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I know this isn't the life you chose or the circumstances you wanted, but having you here these past weeks," a sudden pounding at the door cut him off. They both tensed, Isaac immediately reaching for the revolver he kept nearby. "Forrester." "It's Donovan," came the sheriff's voice, urgent and demanding. Isaac opened the door to find the sheriff disheveled and out of breath. "We've got trouble," Donovan announced without preamble. "One of Blackwater's men recognized my deputy asking questions in Bitter Creek. They know I've been gathering evidence, and they've figured out you're involved." "How much do they know?" Isaac demanded, ushering the sheriff inside. "Enough to be dangerous. Word is Blackwater's hired a pair of professional manhunters, the Creed brothers. They've been asking questions about you in every town within 100 miles. Lillian felt cold fear grip her heart. "They know I'm here." "Not yet," Donovan replied grimly. "But they're methodical. They'll find this place eventually." Isaac's expression hardened into resolved determination. "Then we need to move before they do. How close is the judge to arriving?" 3 weeks at the earliest, Donovan said. "I've sent word urging him to hurry, but it won't make much difference." 3 weeks is too long, Isaac muttered, pacing the room. "If the Creed brothers are on our trail, we have days at most." "What options do we have?" Lillian asked, struggling to keep the fear from her voice. Isaac and Donovan exchanged a look that made Lillian's stomach tighten with apprehension. "There might be a way," Isaac said slowly. "But you're not going to like it." "At this point, Mr. Forrester, I'm willing to consider anything that keeps me alive long enough to testify," Lillian replied with more bravery than she felt. Isaac took a deep breath. "Marriage. I beg your pardon." Lillian wasn't certain she'd heard correctly. "Blackwater's men are looking for Lillian Keller, a single woman traveling alone or in the company of a Pinkerton detective," Isaac explained. "They're not looking for Mrs. Isaac Forrester, a rancher's wife who's been living here for years." "It would change your legal status," Donovan added. "Make it harder for them to force you to go with them even if they did find you. A single woman can be more easily coerced." "You want me to marry you?" "As a disguise?" Lillian asked Isaac, trying to process the suggestion. "As protection," Isaac corrected. "We would be legally married, but it would be an arrangement of convenience. Once Blackwater is convicted and the danger has passed, we could seek an annulment if that's what you want." Lillian stood and moved to the window, needing distance to think clearly. The idea was shocking, yet not entirely unwelcome, a realization that surprised her more than the proposal itself. Over the past weeks, her feelings toward Isaac had evolved from cautious gratitude to genuine affection, and perhaps something deeper that she wasn't yet ready to name. "This isn't how I imagined marriage would come to me," she said finally, turning back to face the two men. "But then again, nothing about my current situation follows the path I'd imagined for my life." "You don't have to decide immediately," Isaac said, his expression carefully neutral. "Think it over tonight, but we'll need to act quickly if this is the route we choose." Donovan departed soon after, promising to return the following day for their decision. Lillian retired to her room, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Marriage to Isaac would provide the protection she desperately needed, but at what cost to her independence? And what of her growing feelings for him, feelings that made the prospect of a marriage of convenience both more appealing and more complicated? She slept little that night, weighing her limited options. By morning, her decision was made, shaped as much by practical necessity as by the undeniable pull she felt toward the quiet, honorable man who had risked so much to keep her safe. Isaac was waiting in the kitchen when she emerged, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands and uncertainty in his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Good morning," Lillian replied, pouring herself coffee before sitting across from him at the worn wooden table. "I've made my decision." Isaac nodded, waiting. "I'll marry you," Lillian stated plainly. "For protection, as you suggested, relief, and something else." Something that looked almost like disappointment flashed across Isaac's face. "You're certain? I don't want you to feel forced into this." "I'm certain it's the most practical solution to our current problem," Lillian replied, choosing her words carefully. "What I'm less certain about is what happens afterward." Isaac set down his cup, his gray eyes holding her steadily. "After Blackwater is brought to justice, you'll be free to choose your own path, Lillian. If you wish to return to Silver Creek and resume your former life, I won't stand in your way. If you wish to seek an annulment, I'll respect that decision. And if I wish for neither of those options?" Lillian asked softly. The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to fully articulate. "Then we would have to discover what other paths might be available to us," Isaac replied, his voice equally soft. "Together." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Roy Jenkins, coming to report on the condition of the injured horses from the storm. By mid-morning, Sheriff Donovan had returned as promised, bringing with him a justice of the peace from the county seat. The ceremony took place in the main room of the ranch house, witnessed by Roy, Emma, and the somewhat befuddled Daniel, his arm in a sling. It was brief and without adornment, no flowers, no special dress, only the essential words that would bind Lillian legally to Isaac and provide her the protection of his name. "Do you, Isaac James Forrester, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the justice intoned. "I do," Isaac replied, his voice steady as he held Lillian's gaze. "And do you, Lillian Marie Keller, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Lillian took a breath, acutely aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought her to this moment. "I do," she answered, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." There was a brief, awkward pause before Isaac leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on Lillian's lips, their first physical contact beyond the casual touches necessary in their daily lives. Brief as it was, the kiss sent a tremor through Lillian that had nothing to do with fear or uncertainty. Sheriff Donovan stepped forward with papers for them both to sign: marriage certificate, property documents adding Lillian's name to the ranch deed for authenticity, a will hastily drawn up naming her as Isaac's heir. The legal scaffolding of their marriage of convenience was constructed with efficient pragmatism. After the justice and the sheriff departed, Roy and Emma insisted on hosting a small celebration dinner. Emma produced a cake she'd secretly baked that morning, while Roy contributed a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. The unexpected warmth of the celebration brought tears to Lillian's eyes. These people who had been strangers a month ago were now treating her as family. The true awkwardness came later, when the others had retired, and Lillian and Isaac found themselves alone in the house, now ostensibly husband and wife. "I've moved my things to the room across from yours," Isaac said, breaking the silence. "For appearances, we should share the main bedroom when we have visitors, but otherwise." "Thank you," Lillian replied, grateful for his consideration yet oddly disappointed. That seemed sensible. Another silence fell between them, heavy with unasked questions and unspoken feelings. "Lillian," Isaac began hesitantly, "I want you to know that the sound of approaching horses cut him off. In an instant, his demeanor changed, every muscle tensing as he moved to the window. "Get your things," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "Everything you need for a few days. Now." "What is it?" Lillian asked, already moving toward her room. Riders, at least 4, maybe more, coming fast and without lanterns. Cold fear washed through Lillian. Blackwater's men, possibly. Or the Creed brothers. Either way, we're not waiting to find out. Isaac was already checking his revolver and gathering ammunition. "There's a cabin in the high pastures where we sometimes stay during calving season. Roy knows where it is, but few others would think to look there." Lillian hurriedly packed a small bag with essentials, her hands shaking slightly as she moved. By the time she returned to the main room, Isaac had extinguished all but one lamp and was peering out the window again. "They've stopped at the edge of the property," he reported, "discussing something. We have maybe 5 minutes to slip out the back and get to the horses." They moved silently through the darkened house and out the rear door. Isaac had already saddled 2 horses Sundance, and a steady mare named Belle that Lillian had grown comfortable riding during her stay at the ranch. "Stay close and follow my lead," Isaac instructed as they mounted. "If anything happens to me, ride north until you reach the river, then follow it east to the town of Riverton. Ask for Sheriff Donovan's cousin, Patrick. He'll help you." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Lillian said firmly, refusing to contemplate that possibility. Isaac gave her a quick, grim smile before urging Sundance forward. They kept to a walk until they were well away from the house, sticking to the shadows cast by the 3/4 moon. Only when they reached the cover of a stand of pines did Isaac signal for them to increase their pace. They rode through the night, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. Lillian's muscles ached from the sustained effort, but fear and determination kept her alert. Occasionally, Isaac would halt and listen intently before continuing, his face a mask of concentration in the moonlight. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the cabin, little more than a one-room shelter with a small attached lean-to for the horses. It was primitive but solidly built, with a stone fireplace and shuttered windows. "We should be safe here for now," Isaac said as he helped Lillian dismount. "It's not on any maps and it's difficult to approach without being seen from a distance." Inside, the cabin was dusty but otherwise clean, containing a narrow bed, a rough table with 2 chairs and basic cooking implements. Isaac immediately set about securing the perimeter while Lillian organized their supplies. "You think they'll search the whole ranch?" she asked as she laid out their meager provisions. "Eventually," Isaac replied, returning from his inspection. "But it's 5,000 acres with a lot of rough country. It would take days to search thoroughly, and they don't know for certain we're still here. They might think we've fled to another town. What if they threaten Roy or the others?" Lillian worried. "Roy knows how to handle himself, and he knows nothing about this cabin." "Daniel and Thomas were sent to the line cabin on the eastern boundary. Before we left, they'll be well away from any trouble." Exhausted from the night's ride, they took turns sleeping, one keeping watch while the other rested. The day passed in tense vigilance, with Isaac periodically checking the surrounding area for signs of pursuit. By nightfall, there had been no indication of danger, though neither of them relaxed their guard. They ate a cold supper of jerky and biscuits, conserving their supplies and avoiding a fire that might be spotted from a distance. "We should be able to return to the main house tomorrow if there's no sign of trouble," Isaac said as they finished their sparse meal. Sheriff Donovan will be looking for us when he hears about the riders. Lillian nodded, suddenly aware of the strange intimacy of their situation alone in this isolated cabin, legally married, yet still maintaining the careful distance of new acquaintances. The events of the past 24 hours had happened so quickly that she'd barely had time to process the reality of being Isaac Forrester's wife, even in name only. "Isaac," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." He looked up, his expression guarded. "Yes. When we made this decision, it was out of necessity for my protection," Lillian continued, gathering her courage. "But I want you to know that I don't regret it. Whatever happens with Blackwater, whatever comes after, I'm grateful for what you've done for me." Isaac's face softened. "Lillian, you should know that while protection was certainly a motivation for my proposal, it wasn't the only one." "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart quickening. Before he could answer, the distant sound of a horse's whinny carried through the night air. Isaac was on his feet instantly, motioning for Lillian to stay silent as he moved to the window. For several tense minutes, they waited, barely breathing. Then came the sound of Roy Jenkins's distinctive whistle, a signal they had arranged for emergencies. Isaac's shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's Roy," he said, moving to unbar the door. "But stay back until I'm certain he's alone." Roy was indeed alone, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Thank God you're both safe," he said as he dismounted. "Those men tore the place apart looking for you. Blackwater's men." Isaac asked, helping Roy stable his horse. "The Creed brothers and 3 hired guns," Roy confirmed grimly. "They showed up claiming to be bounty hunters with a warrant for Miss Keller, Mrs. Forrester now, I should say. I told them she was your wife of 2 years and had never set foot in Silver Creek, but they weren't buying it." "Did they hurt anyone?" Lillian asked anxiously. "No, madam. They roughed me up a bit, but nothing serious. Emma was visiting her sister in town, thankfully." "Daniel and Thomas were out of harm's way like you planned." "What did they do when they didn't find us?" Isaac pressed. "Ransacked the house, then split up to search the property. They didn't believe you'd both just disappeared. I overheard one of them say they'd check every ranch and homestead within 50 miles. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Then we can't go back yet, not until we know they've moved on." "There's more," Roy added soberly. "They know about your Pinkerton connections, boss. One of them mentioned something about information from an insider at the agency." Isaac swore under his breath. "That complicates things. If they know I was a Pinkerton, they'll be even more convinced Lillian is the witness they're hunting. What do we do now?" Lillian asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Isaac was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing their limited options. "We need to get you somewhere they won't think to look, somewhere beyond Blackwater's reach until the circuit judge arrives." "My sister's place in Montana," Roy suggested. "It's a good 3 days' ride north of here, but once you cross into Montana territory, you'd be outside Blackwater's sphere of influence." "That might work," Isaac nodded slowly. "But we need to travel carefully, if the Creed brothers are watching the main roads." "There's an old trapper's trail through the high country," Roy said. "Hardly anyone uses it these days. It's rough going, but it would get you to Montana without crossing any major routes." The plan was quickly formed. They would leave before dawn, taking only what they could carry on their horses. Roy would return to the main ranch to deal with the aftermath of the search and to mislead the Creed brothers if possible. That night, Lillian and Isaac shared the cabin's single bed out of necessity, though they maintained a careful distance between them, each acutely aware of the other's presence in the darkness. "I'm sorry," Isaac said quietly after they had lain in silence for some time. "This isn't the marriage I would have wanted for you." "What kind of marriage would you have wanted?" Lillian asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. There was a long pause before Isaac answered, his voice low in the darkness. One born of choice rather than necessity. One where you came to me because you wanted to, not because you needed protection. Lillian turned toward him, though she could barely make out his profile in the dim light. What if I told you that while necessity brought us together, my feelings have changed since then? She felt rather than saw him shift to face her. Lillian, I'm not saying I know what the future holds, she continued, emboldened by the darkness. But I am saying that I no longer view our marriage as merely an arrangement of convenience. These past weeks at Elkhorn, they've meant something to me. You've come to mean something to me. Isaac's hand found hers beneath the blankets, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. When this is over, he said, his voice rough with emotion, when you're safe and Blackwater is behind bars, I'd like to court you properly, if you'd allow it. Lillian felt a smile spread across her face. I think that would be acceptable, Mr. Forrester, though it does seem rather backwards to court your own wife. His soft chuckle warmed her more than the blankets covering them. Nothing about our situation has been conventional, Mrs. Forrester. Why start now? They set out before first light, following the faint trail Roy had described. The path took them through dense forests and across high alpine meadows where wildflowers nodded in the early summer breeze. Under different circumstances, Lillian might have found the journey beautiful. As it was, every snapping twig and distant sound had her tensing in anticipation of discovery. Isaac proved to be a skilled guide, reading the terrain and keeping them moving at a steady pace. By nightfall of the first day, they had covered significant ground, making camp in a sheltered ravine where the risk of their fire being spotted was minimal. We should reach the Montana border by tomorrow evening, Isaac said as he prepared a small supper from their provisions. From there, it's another day to Roy's sister's place. Lillian nodded, stretching her sore muscles. She had grown more comfortable on horseback during her time at Elkhorn, but the rough trail and constant vigilance made this journey far more taxing. You think they're still searching for us? She asked, accepting the tin plate Isaac offered. Probably, he replied honestly. The Creed brothers have a reputation for tenacity, but they're also pragmatic. If they don't find a trail soon, they might move on to easier prey. They ate in companionable silence, the tension of the previous night replaced by a new understanding between them. Though nothing had been explicitly stated beyond Isaac's desire to court her properly when the danger had passed, Lillian felt a shift in their relationship, a movement from arrangement toward genuine partnership. As they settled for the night, sharing blankets for warmth in the mountain chill, Isaac hesitantly put his arm around her. Lillian nestled against him, finding comfort in his solid presence. Tell me about Silver Creek, Isaac said softly. What was your life like there? Lillian described her small seamstress shop, the garden she'd cultivated behind her modest house, the friends and customers who had filled her days. As she spoke, she realized that while she missed aspects of that life, it already felt distant, belonging to a different Lillian Keller than the woman she was becoming. Would you want to go back? Isaac asked, the question casual yet freighted with meaning. I don't know, Lillian answered honestly. A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, I'm not certain that life would fit me anymore. Isaac's arm tightened slightly around her. Elkhorn would always have a place for you, regardless of what happens between us. You should know that. Thank you, Lillian whispered, touched by the sincerity in his voice. But I think what happens between us matters very much to me. In the darkness, she felt him press a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture so tender it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. They fell asleep, thus entwined, the boundaries between convenience and genuine affection continuing to blur. The second day of travel brought them into more exposed terrain, rolling hills with less tree cover. Isaac set a faster pace, aware of their vulnerability in the open country. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, promising another summer storm. "We need to find shelter before that hits," Isaac said, scanning the landscape with concern. "There's an old line shack marked on Roy's map, about an hour's ride from here. If we push hard, we might reach it before the worst of the weather." They urged their tired horses forward, racing against the approaching storm. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Just as the first heavy drops began to fall, a small wooden structure appeared in the distance, the line shack Isaac had mentioned. It was more dilapidated than they'd hoped, with a partially collapsed roof and broken windows, but it would provide better shelter than the open plains. They had barely gotten the horses under the adjacent lean-to when the skies opened, releasing a deluge that turned the ground to mud within minutes. Inside, the shack was dusty and home to various small creatures, but a portion of it remained dry enough to make camp. Isaac set about securing the space while Lillian arranged their dampened supplies. "The storms brought us one advantage," Isaac remarked as he attempted to block a leak in the remaining roof. "It will wash away any tracks we've left." Lillian nodded, wringing water from her hair. "How much farther to Montana?" "If my calculations are correct, we've already crossed the border," Isaac replied. "This shack is just inside Montana territory. We should reach Roy's sister's place by tomorrow afternoon if the weather clears." The knowledge that they had left Wyoming and presumably Blackwater's immediate sphere of influence brought Lillian a small measure of relief. The storm continued through the evening, lightning illuminating the shabby interior of the shack in brief, brilliant flashes. They made a cold supper of the last of their provisions, huddled together for warmth as the temperature dropped with nightfall. The intimacy of their situation was inescapable in the confined space, yet neither seemed inclined to maintain the careful distance they had observed at Elkhorn. "When did you know?" Lillian asked suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. "Know what?" Isaac replied, though something in his tone suggested he understood her question, "that you wanted more than a marriage of convenience." Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think I knew the possibility was there from the beginning," he finally said. "But I realized it for certain the night of the storm when you helped Daniel, watching you set his arm, seeing your compassion and competence. I remember thinking that you belonged at Elkhorn in a way that had nothing to do with protection or convenience." His honesty emboldened Lillian to offer her own. "For me, it was more gradual. It was in the small things, the way you always made sure there was hot water for me in the mornings, how you listened when I spoke as if what I had to say mattered, how you never made me feel like a burden, even though my presence complicated your life immeasurably." Isaac's hand found hers in the darkness. "You were never a burden, Lillian. From the moment you arrived, you brought something to Elkhorn to me that I hadn't realized was missing." The confession hung between them, simple yet profound in its implications. Lillian turned toward him, finding his face in the darkness by touch rather than sight. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, feeling the rough stubble there. "Isaac," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent a shiver through her entirely unrelated to the cold. Then, with gentle deliberation, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss began tentatively, a question rather than a demand, but quickly deepened as Lillian responded. All the unspoken feelings of the past weeks seemed to find expression in that embrace, transcending the circumstances that had brought them together. When they finally drew apart, Both were breathing unevenly. Isaac rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you to know," he said, "that whatever happens, whatever you decide when this is all over, I will never regret marrying you, Lillian. Even if it began as protection, it's become the most important thing I've ever done." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "I won't regret it either," she whispered. "No matter what comes next." The storm continued through the night, but within the ramshackle shelter, something new had taken root, a love born of extraordinary circumstances, but no less real for its unusual beginnings. Morning brought clearing skies and the practical necessity of continuing their journey. Whatever revelations had occurred during the storm were set aside for the immediate concerns of reaching safety. They rode through terrain that gradually transitioned from rugged hills to more gentle farmland, following landmarks from Roy's hand-drawn map. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and saw below them a neat farmhouse surrounded by fields of ripening wheat. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a small figure could be seen hanging laundry on a line in the yard. "That's it," Isaac confirmed, checking the map one final time. "Roy's sister's place." They approached cautiously, aware that even in Montana they couldn't be certain of their safety. The woman in the yard, a sturdier, feminine version of Roy with the same weather-beaten features and kind eyes, spotted them and shaded her eyes against the sun. "Sarah Jenkins," Isaac called as they drew closer. "Roy sent us." Recognition dawned on the woman's face. "You must be Isaac Forrester," she replied. "Roy's fastest rider arrived last night with a message about you and your wife. Come in, quickly." Inside the farmhouse, they were greeted with hot food, clean clothes, and the first real beds they'd seen since fleeing Elkhorn. Sarah's husband, a taciturn man named John Wilson, asked few questions but offered their home for as long as needed. That evening, after a meal that seemed luxurious after days of trail rations, Sarah handed Isaac a telegram that had arrived that morning. "It's from Sheriff Donovan," she explained. Isaac read it quickly, his expression shifting from concern to cautious optimism. "The circuit judge has arrived early," he told Lillian. "He's scheduled the hearing for next week. Donovan wants us to meet him in Helena 3 days from now to prepare your testimony." "Is it safe?" Lillian asked. "The telegram says the Creed brothers were spotted heading south toward Utah territory," Isaac replied. "They may have given up the search or been called back by Blackwater." "Or it could be a trap," John Wilson interjected grimly. "Telegrams can be intercepted." "True," Isaac acknowledged, "but we can't miss this opportunity. If the judge is ready to hear evidence against Blackwater, this might be our only chance to bring him to justice." After much discussion, they developed a plan. John would accompany them to Helena, taking a circuitous route and traveling only during daylight hours when they could better spot potential ambushes. Sarah would remain at the farm to maintain the appearance of normalcy and to receive any further messages from Roy or Donovan. The journey to Helena passed without incident, though all three remained vigilant for signs of pursuit. The territorial capital proved busier than Lillian had anticipated, with the streets crowded with miners, ranchers, and businessmen from throughout Montana. They found Sheriff Donovan at the hotel where he'd arranged rooms for them. The relief on his weathered face was evident as he greeted them. "Thank God you made it," he said, ushering them quickly upstairs. "I was beginning to fear the worst." In the privacy of their room, Donovan shared the developments of the past week. The evidence against Blackwater had continued to mount, financial records showing bribes to officials, testimonies from intimidated homesteaders who'd lost their land, even a deathbed confession from one of Blackwater's former associates, implicating him in 3 murders beyond Marshall Davis. "Your testimony about the Marshall's murder is still crucial," Donovan told Lillian. "It provides direct evidence of Blackwater's willingness to eliminate those who threaten his operations. But even without it, we have enough to put him away for years." "What about the Creed brothers?" Isaac asked. "No confirmed sightings since they left Wyoming," Donovan replied. "But that doesn't mean they've given up. Blackwater's desperate. The noose is tightening and he knows it." Over the next 2 days, Lillian prepared for her testimony with Donovan and the territorial prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor Winters, who had made a reputation for herself pursuing cases against corrupt officials. The rarity of a female prosecutor initially surprised Lillian, but Eleanor's competence quickly overshadowed any novelty. "Your testimony must be precise and unwavering," Eleanor instructed. "Blackwater's attorney will try to discredit you, suggest you were mistaken in what you saw, or imply you have personal motives for accusing him. We need to be prepared for all possibilities." Isaac remained by Lillian's side throughout the preparations, his steady presence providing comfort during the grueling sessions. At night, in the privacy of their hotel room, they found solace in each other's arms, their newfound intimacy a sanctuary from the stress of the impending hearing. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cool. Lillian, dressed with care in clothes Sarah, had provided a simple but respectable navy blue dress that befitted a rancher's wife appearing in court. Isaac wore his one good suit, the formality of it transforming him from rugged rancher to the professional detective he had once been. The territorial courthouse was already crowded when they arrived, with curious citizens and journalists eager to witness the proceedings against the notorious Conrad Blackwater. Lillian felt her heart race as they entered, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Blackwater or his men. "He's not here yet," Isaac murmured, sensing her anxiety. "Donovan has deputies positioned throughout the building. You're safe." The hearing began with the prosecutor presenting the accumulated evidence against Blackwater. Documents were entered into record, witnesses testified to land swindles and intimidation, and the former associate's deathbed confession was read into evidence. Throughout it all, Lillian sat with Isaac in the gallery, waiting for her turn to testify. When Conrad Blackwater finally entered the courtroom, flanked by his attorney and 2 deputies, Lillian felt a cold shiver of recognition. Though she had only seen him briefly on that fateful night at the marshal's office, his presence carried the same menace. She remembered a calculated cruelty lurking behind the veneer of respectability. Blackwater's gaze swept the courtroom, pausing briefly when it reached Lillian. Something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or merely the habitual assessment of a predator, made her blood run cold. Isaac's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent reassurance. When Lillian was finally called to testify, she rose on shaky legs. Isaac's whispered courage gave her strength as she made her way to the witness stand. After being sworn in, she faced the courtroom, aware of every eye upon her, including Blackwater's calculating stare. "Mrs. Forrester," Eleanor Winters began, "please tell the court your name and relationship to the accused." "My name is Lillian Forrester," she replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I have no personal relationship with Mr. Blackwater, but I witnessed him commit murder." A murmur ran through the courtroom at her direct statement. Judge Harlan Montgomery, a severe-looking man with bushy white eyebrows, called for order. Under Eleanor's careful questioning, Lillian recounted the events of that night in Silver Creek, how she had been returning home from delivering mending, had heard raised voices from the marshal's office, and had glanced through the window to see Blackwater shoot Marshal Davis at point-blank range. "I saw him clearly," Lillian stated firmly. There was a lamp burning in the office, and his face was illuminated when he turned to leave. I recognized him as Mr. Blackwater, who owned the bank and several businesses in town. I'd seen him many times before. When Alina finished her questions, Blackwater's attorney rose for cross-examination. He was a slick, well-dressed man with cold eyes and a practiced smile. "Mrs. Forrester," he began smoothly, "or should I say Miss Keller, your marriage to Mr. Forrester is quite recent, is it not?" "Objection," Alina interrupted. "Mrs. Forrester's marital status is irrelevant to her testimony." "I'm establishing the witness's credibility, Your Honor," the defense attorney countered. "The timing of this convenient marriage bears directly on her motivations." Judge Montgomery considered briefly. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Parker." Lillian met the attorney's gaze steadily. "Yes, I married Isaac Forrester after witnessing the murder. When Mr. Blackwater's men began hunting me, I needed protection." "How convenient," Parker remarked with a slight sneer. "And Mr. Forrester, a former Pinkerton detective who has been investigating my client, just happened to be available to provide that protection." "There was nothing convenient about fleeing for my life, Mr. Parker," Lillian replied, a flash of anger giving strength to her voice. "I left behind my business, my home, everything I'd worked for. I married Mr. Forrester because it offered safety from the men Mr. Blackwater sent to silence me, the same men who have terrorized countless others who dared stand against him." A murmur of approval rippled through the spectators. Judge Montgomery banged his gavel once, but there was a glint of something like approval in his stern gaze. Parker tried several more angles of attack, suggesting the lighting was too poor for reliable identification, implying that Lillian had been coached in her testimony, even insinuating a prior grievance against Blackwater. To each, Lillian responded with calm certainty, refusing to be rattled. When she was finally dismissed from the witness stand, Lillian felt drained yet strangely exhilarated. She had faced Blackwater and his attorney without flinching, had spoken the truth despite the fear that had haunted her for months. The hearing continued with final arguments from both sides. Judge Montgomery listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions that suggested he was not easily swayed by the defense's attempts to discredit the evidence. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, the judge rendered his decision. "Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to bind Conrad Blackwater over for trial on charges of murder, corruption, extortion, and conspiracy," he declared, his voice resonating through the now hushed courtroom. "Bail is denied due to the serious nature of the charges and the demonstrated willingness of the accused to interfere with witnesses." A cheer erupted from the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. As Blackwater was led away by deputies, his face contorted with rage, he turned toward Lillian and Isaac. "This isn't over," he spat, the words barely audible above the commotion in the courtroom. "Actually, Mr. Blackwater, I believe it is," Judge Montgomery stated coldly, having overheard the threat. "Add intimidation of a witness to the charges." Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Donovan and Alina Winters congratulated Lillian on her testimony. "You were magnificent," Alina said warmly. "Clear, concise, and unshakable, exactly what we needed." "What happens now?" Isaac asked, his arm protectively around Lillian's shoulders. "Blackwater will be held for trial," Donovan explained. "Given the evidence and the judge's ruling today, a conviction is all but certain. He's looking at 20 years at minimum, possibly hanging if the murder charges stick." "And the Creed brothers?" Lillian asked, the specter of the manhunters still haunting her thoughts. "Without Blackwater to pay them, they'll move on to other bounties," Donovan assured her. "But as a precaution, I've arranged for a deputy to escort you back to your ranch in Wyoming if that's where you're headed." Isaac glanced at Lillian, a question in his eyes. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think we might stay in Montana for a while, give things time to settle." Lillian nodded her agreement, understanding the unspoken sentiment behind his words. They needed time not just for safety, but to explore what their relationship had become beyond the necessity that had forged it. They remained in Montana for 2 months, dividing their time between Sarah and John's farm and Helena, where Lillian was occasionally called to provide additional statements as Blackwater's case progressed toward trial. During this time, their marriage evolved from an arrangement into a genuine partnership. Isaac revealed more of himself than he had at Elkhorn, his hopes for the ranch, his weariness with the violence of his Pinkerton days, his desire for a simpler life that still had purpose. Lillian shared her own dreams, not just returning to her seamstress work, but perhaps expanding it, creating designs rather than merely executing others' visions. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and histories. They argued occasionally, reconciled tenderly, and gradually built a foundation stronger than the circumstances that had initially joined them. When word came that Conrad Blackwater had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to hang, the news brought closure rather than celebration. The threat that had defined their relationship's beginning was finally, truly ended. "We could return to Elkhorn now," Isaac said as they sat on the porch of Sarah's farmhouse that evening, watching the sunset paint the wheat fields in gold and crimson. "If that's what you want." Lillian considered the question carefully, aware of its importance. "Is that what you want, Isaac?" "I want whatever makes you happy," he replied simply. "If that's Silver Creek and your seamstress shop, we could rebuild there. If it's Elkhorn, then that's where we'll go. If it's somewhere entirely new." Lillian turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "When I fled Silver Creek, I lost everything I thought defined me: my business, my home, my independence. I was terrified not just of Blackwater, but of becoming someone's obligation, someone's burden." "You were never," Isaac began, but Lillian gently placed her fingers over his lips. "Let me finish," she said softly. "What I found instead at Elkhorn with you was something I hadn't known to want. Not just safety, but belonging. Not just protection, but partnership. I discovered that independence doesn't have to mean being alone." Isaac's eyes held hers steadily, their gray depths reflecting the fading light. "What are you saying, Lillian?" "I'm saying I want to go home to Elkhorn," she replied, her voice sure. "Not because it's safe now, but because it's where we began. Where I fell in love with a man who offered me protection but gave me so much more." The word love hung between them, spoken aloud for the first time. Isaac's hand came up to cup her cheek, his expression one of wonder and certainty. "I love you, Lillian Forrester," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because of circumstances or convenience, but because of who you are: your courage, your kindness, your strength. I think I've loved you since that first night at the cabin when you insisted you wouldn't be beholden to any man." Lillian laughed softly. "I was rather prickly, wasn't I?" "You were magnificent," Isaac corrected, drawing her closer. "You still are." Their kiss held the promise of the future they would build together, one chosen rather than forced upon them by danger and necessity. They returned to Elkhorn Ranch in the autumn, when the aspen leaves had turned to gold and the first dusting of snow brightened the distant peaks. Roy, Emma, Daniel, and Thomas welcomed them home with a celebration that lasted well into the night, complete with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As winter settled over the ranch, Lillian and Isaac established new routines. She set up a small workroom in what had once been a storage area, ordering fabrics and patterns from as far away as San Francisco. Word of her skills spread through the nearby communities, bringing a steady stream of customers to the ranch. Isaac formally resigned from the Pinkerton agency, choosing instead to focus on building Elkhorn into one of the most respected ranches in the territory. He still occasionally assisted Sheriff Donovan with particularly troublesome cases, but his priorities had shifted decisively toward home and family. By the following spring, when the wildflowers once again carpeted the high meadows of Elkhorn, Lillian had news to share. Standing in the doorway of their home, watching Isaac return from a day's work with the cattle, she placed a hand on her still flat stomach and smiled. Their family, like their love, was growing born of extraordinary circumstances, but flourishing in the simple joys of everyday life. In the years that followed, the story of how Lillian Keller had married Isaac Forrester for protection and found a love strong enough to outlast fear became something of a legend in the region. It was a tale told at gatherings and celebrations, embellished somewhat with each retelling but true at its core to the remarkable journey of two people who had found in each other not just safety, but home. And on summer evenings, long after the events that had brought them together had faded into history, Lillian and Isaac would sit on the porch of their ranch house, surrounded by their children and eventually grandchildren, marveling at how the greatest dangers had led to the deepest blessings, and how love, once discovered, could transform even the darkest fear into enduring light.